License conditions. We operate all of the license types, the foundation, standard and advanced, are subject to a whole lot of legislation. These are scary. You don't need to know these. The only one you really need to know is the actual license conditions determination, the LCD. But what sits above these are the Act, then some regulations, then some determinations in relation to how we operate and where we operate and what frequencies we operate on and all sorts of stuff. So the key one here is the licence conditions determination that sets those. And as part of the practical, I'm actually going to get you to show me in this document, I'm going to give you the LCD and show me where the foundation licence frequencies, modes and power is in this document. So you just need to find it in this document and show me that you can actually find it in the document. Primary function of amateur radio: self-training, communicate with other amateurs, and also conduct technical investigations into radio communications. Now that can be as simple as, I could contact Fred yesterday, but I can't contact him today. Why? And start to understand why. So that's what's actually specified in the ITU radio regulations. That's what determines and shapes amateur radio. There is an exception though, that an amateur normally can only operate on amateur frequencies. However, in a distress or emergency situation, you can operate outside of amateur frequencies, if you can. that's obviously a stipulation. But also where you are authorised by a ACMA radio inspector. I think there's a number of radio inspectors around Australia. There is one in Tasmania, I know that. And if they authorise you to operate outside of it, and you can, go for it. Now, distress and urgency signals. We need to know if we hear something on a amateur band, whether it's distress or urgent. So, if there is the use of the word mayday, mayday is a danger to life type word. So if you hear that on the amateur bands, you stop transmitting, you start listening, and you start taking some details. And if you can go back to them and try and get some other details from them, which you then pass on to authorities. In our case, it would be ring 000. If it's a boat, then 000 would be ringing, I don't know, AMSA, and they start to work out what's going on. So if you hear a mayday communication, you are responsible to pass on that information to appropriate authorities. In this case, it would be 000. And some urgent situations don't warrant mayday, but if you then hear something like a pan on the amateur bands, pan is an urgency signal. So what you would then do is again stop operating, start listening, and start, if you can, assisting and potentially reporting them to the appropriate authorities. So and that doesn't necessarily need to be on an amateur band. That's one of the key exceptions. Okay, messages may be passed on behalf of third party. So that's somebody who's standing next to you who's not an amateur, saying, can you tell Fred that? However, there are some limitations around what you can those messages you can pass. They don't relate to business or financial affairs of the person, or for gain, commercial purposes, or advertising, or entertainment. Now that doesn't mean that you can't tell a joke. What that tends to relate to is things like music. You can't play music on a band like a broadcast station. That's not what it's about. Or relate to business or financial affairs of any persons. So amateur station is not for financial gain, so it can't be used for a commercial operation. That's part of the stipulation and the conditions around operating. And we are allowed to send third-party messages in Australia. However, you need to be aware that not all countries allow it. And so if you're talking to another country and you're not actually quite sure whether a third-party message is allowed in that country, I would probably not send it. Because you could actually be going against their licence conditions at the other end. So just you need to be aware that that's a possibility. Part of the practical includes correct station identification, and we'll go through how we do that. Under the regulations, you need to actually identify every 10 minutes at the beginning and the end, and also every 10 minutes if you're going over a longer period of time. Even a test transmission. So if you're testing or tuning your antenna, you must give a station identification, so your actual call sign, and we'll go into our call signs in a sec. In fact, right now. Call signs are allocated around the world, not only the Australian Amateur Service, and they each have a unique identifier in front of them. For Australia, one of the identifiers is VK, the most commonly used one. When we do the practical and we go out into the operating area next door, there's a big world map on the wall that shows you each of the country's identifiers. Very handy if you hear a particular identifier and you don't know where it's coming from. So the very first bit of the call sign indicates which country it's coming from, VK. The next one is a number. Now the number correlates to, if you're used to postcodes, it's a good way of remembering it. A lot of people we don't post letters anymore, so people aren't used to postcodes. But so it follows the postcodes. 0 is Antarctica, 1 is ACT, 2 is New South Wales, 3 is Victoria, 4 is Queensland, 5 is South Australia, 6 is Western Australia, and 7 is Tasmania, and 8 is the like Christmas Island and Heard Island and Norfolk Island and etc. etc. So that gives you an indication about which state or territory they're actually in. One of the recent changes is that Foundation Standard and Advanced licensees can hold any combination of 3 letters. It used to be an F and 3 letters. It's no longer an F and 3 letters. It's any 3 letters. So that's a bit of a change. And 2-letter call signs are only for advanced licence holders where they are available. In the larger states, in the more popular states, they've run out of them. So when they come up, they're like hot potatoes. There's an auction and all sorts of stuff held for them. So not a problem in Tasmania yet. Transmission of messages that are encoded for the purpose of obscuring the message. So if you're encrypting a message or whatever with via a means that is not known by the regulator, that's actually not permitted under the LCD. And transmission of any form of entertainment is not permitted. So that's a lot more about music, etc., etc. It's not about telling a joke over here. Foundation Amateur Licence authorises certain frequencies and certain bands and certain emission modes, and guess where it's specified. So now the other restriction for a foundation licence and also for a standard licence is power levels. So the amount of power that you can actually transmit, maximum of 10 watts, what we call peak envelope power, and we'll talk about that in a few slides' time. So 10 watts average on SSB, and 10 watts peak envelope power. So the peak you put out is limited to 10 watts, and then average for AM, FM and CW, and we'll go into those in the technical session. And amateur operators, when you apply for your licence, you need to put an address of your station, and that's so that the ACMA know that there is a transmitting station at that address. So if there is an interference issue or something like that, they actually know where it is. There is a publicly available register of licences that's available called the RADCOM database. You don't have to put your actual address on there. You can put a post office box on there if you are concerned about your address being in a public database. However, you do need to let the ACMA know what the actual address is. They just don't publish that actual address. They publish the PO box. So yeah, that's one of the requirements. One of the others is we are not to cause harmful interference. So, and harmful, the bold-faced word there, harmful interference is harmful to another radio communication service. So that can be, a good example is if you were operating and you were interfering with a mobile phone tower for whatever reason, that would be considered to be harmful interference because it's actually causing interference to another commercial service. So, and harmful is actually defined in the Act. So in order to avoid interference, the ACMA actually has the right to say stop operating. And it is the interesting thing here, and there's usually a question in the exam that comes up quite often. It's radio inspectors who actually have the right and the authorisation to shut down an amateur station, in fact any transmitting station, and to produce his or her licence. And there's usually a question in the exam such that who can actually ask you to shut down, and it lists police and somebody else and a radio inspector. And in fact, under the Act, it's only the radio inspector who can actually has the authorisation to do that. A lot of people put it like, if a policeman asked me for my licence, I'd probably show it to him, just because he's a policeman. But it's actually not. He doesn't have jurisdiction in this particular case. It's a radio inspector. So, just an interesting little side fact, and there might be a question that comes up in the exam. Foundation licensee of a foundation amateur station may only permit a suitably qualified, so another amateur. Because they are authorised to actually operate the station. Now, this is a change, a recent change. A foundation amateur station may operate an amateur station using automatic or computer-controlled modes. So, a lot of digital modes, you set them up and start them going, and they do the contact and they do all of the things that they have to do. It's a computer-controlled automatic mode. That a foundation licensee up until recently wasn't actually able to do that. They are now. So that's a recent change. That includes things like, and I'll go into some of these in a second slide pack, Internet Repeater Linking Project, Echolink, some of the digital modes, so the digital handheld sort of type modes of DMR, D-Star, and WSJT, the very weak signal digital modes. Foundation licensee can now operate all of those, no restriction. And may also connect to the public telecommunications network, and as in the phone, as in the telephone. So you can actually connect an amateur station via a telephone link to another amateur station. And in fact, some of these digital modes actually use the internet to do that. So you're permitted to do all of that. License condition determination, LCD, either have a copy or a bookmark. And the amateur station licence, so once you passed your test and you get your licence issued to you, it is the amateur station licence that authorises you to operate and to use radio communications as per the conditions in the LCD. And there's usually a bit of a question around this, which is a really confusing question about what authorises your use, and it's your licence. So if you're licensed to transmit, then that's what it's all about. Here's some sample questions. The bands that radio amateurs are allocated are: we'll work through them. To make use of manufactured radio equipment, yeah, whatever. To allow use of the bands independent of the sunspot cycle, I think that one's a furphy, but we'll bear it in mind. To minimise the likelihood of interference to other services, maybe, that's a likely candidate. Totally eliminate interference. Now, you can never totally eliminate interference, so you can discount that one. This is the exam technique I was talking about of interference and safety. This is about interference. To minimise the likelihood of interference to other services. That's a pretty safe guess. So, but you can see they throw in, usually you can discount two, in a multiple choice question type format, you can discount two of them at least. And then you've got in the other two. Go back to here, forget that, you can never do that, so it's got to be C. Foundation licence holder may allow other persons to operate their station if the person have a guess? It's A. Another licensed amateur. Think about it, because it's an amateur station. The only people who can operate an amateur station are amateurs, are licensed amateurs. So it's another one. So
there was a question, because I've been doing these exams, the test exams all week, and one thing that came up was that, because I actually did that, I took that licensed amateur, and this one day flagged it as wrong. It said that anyone could use it as long as they're supervised.
Oh, okay. Which means.
But you've got to be there to actually walk. That's the impression.
Correct. And that's correct. You can supervise someone to use who's not licensed.
Yeah. And let someone else speak over your system.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to double check I wasn't doing
in this particular case, it would be A.
It would be A. Totally, yeah.
In this particular question. Okay, an amateur with a call sign of VK5TW would indicate. Now, let's break it down. What's VK stand for?
Australia.
What's 5? Who wants to have a guess at the state? Think postcode.
South Australia.
South Australia. Good. So it's South Australia. TW. So it's 2 letters.
Advanced.
It's advanced call. So let's work it out. An advanced licence holder in South Australia. It's probably C. But you can see. Let's work out the others. A foundation licence holder in New South Wales. Foundation licence holders are either 4 call, and they start with F, or they're 3 call. So there's still 4 call foundation licence holders out there. So it can't be. It's only 2 letters at the end. A standard licence holder in South Australia. Well, a standard licence holder would be a 3-letter call sign. It's not a 3-letter call sign, so you can discount that. C, and an advanced licence holder in Western Australia. If it was Western Australia, it would be
7. No, 6.
6. It would be 6. So that's how you break down that question. What authorises amateur radio activities in Australia? Now this is the one I was talking about. Authorises amateur radio activities in Australia. Anyone want to have a guess? It's either A or D. because the WIA doesn't. They're just the national body, representative body. A Certificate 3 in electrotechnology doesn't allow you to operate in amateur radio. So is it the LCD or is it the amateur licence?
License.
It's the licence, well and truly, Louise. That's good. And it's specific. The licence is what allows you to operate. The LCD, that's the conditions. Licence conditions determination. It's the licence conditions under which you operate. So, while listening on a frequency not in the amateur band, you hear a mayday call. You must. I do like A, but probably not a good thing. Contact an advanced amateur. Well, they may not be available.
I think we go C.
C.
Report and provide assistance
If possible. Well and truly. And you may not be able to transmit on that frequency, but you have heard it. You still need to report it.